I invite you to open up your copy of God's Word this morning to Mark chapter 13, starting in verse 24. Starting in verse 24, we'll read through to the end of the chapter today. While you're opening there, I want you to consider the monumental task it is to hike the Appalachian Trail. You begin down in Georgia at Springer Mountain, and you end up in Maine at Katahdin. It's nearly a 2,200-mile trek that takes most hikers 5 to 6 months to accomplish. It spans 14 different states, and it's the longest continuous walking path in the entire world. There are 26 different mountain ranges that one passes through on the Appalachian Trail. From the Great Smokies in the south to the White Mountains in the north, there are countless peaks that one summits along the way. From one perspective, when you stand your feet at the trailhead on Springer Mountain there in Georgia, you are on the very same trail as the one in Maine. You could say you are hiking the AT. But it's also true that you won't be hiking that portion of the AT that is in Maine for another 5 or 6 months. So you're hiking the AT, but there will be something that is 6 months later that you have to go through to hike that portion of the AT. On that day, you're only hiking Springer Mountain. You can also speak about hiking it holistically. So you can say you're hiking the Appalachian Trail as a whole, and you can also speak about them distinctly. You can say you're hiking Springer Mountain, and then you're hiking in the Shenandoah Valley there in Virginia, and then you're hiking in the Alleghenies when you enter into the Pennsylvania. Then you're hiking in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Or eventually you can say you're hiking Katahdin there in Maine. The topography would change as you're hiking each of these distinct locations, but you're also doing something that parallels one another. So even though you're changing the locations of where you go, you're still doing the same exact thing day in and day out. You're hiking up and you're hiking down. You're going up to the top of peaks and you're coming down from peaks. There's a matching parallel. So the thing that you did on the very first day of your hike will be very similar to the thing that you do on the very last day of your hike. When one encounters the very first mountain, it's analogous to what one will encounter on the very last day of your hike. Now, there is something very similar in the Bible with how the Bible talks about the future end of the world. There's something very similar to hiking the Appalachian Trail. There is a holistic way of talking about the fact that indeed we are living in the last days. Today, we are in the last days. The trailhead for the world, the reality, began at the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The last days began at Jesus' resurrection. Now, today, we are on the AT of world history. We are living in the last days. While the events of the end times may be 6 years, 60 years, or 600 years away from us, it is still very true that holistically we are living in the last days. Meanwhile, you can also talk about the events distinctly. So you can talk about the beginning of the trailhead and the end of the trailhead. You can focus on the experience of hiking the first mountain on the trail, and you can distinguish it between the experience of hiking the last mountain. And so the Bible can talk about the experiences of the beginning events of the last days, and it can also talk about the end of the trail. Finally, we can talk, or the Bible talks about things in parallel fashion. And so the events that were described at the very beginning of the trailhead will look and feel similar to the events at the end of the trail. They will match each other like patterns. Different topography, no doubt, but still very similar experiences. Last week, we began studying Mark chapter 13, Jesus' teachings about the end times on the Mount of Olives. It's called the Olivet Discourse. We saw in Mark 13, 1 through 23, that Jesus told about an event that would be at the very beginning of the trailhead of the last days, as he was predicting the destruction of the temple there in Jerusalem that would take place in response to the disciples asking him the question. Right at the beginning of Mark 13, the disciples asked, "When will these things occur, and what will be the sign?" These things that are being described is Jesus' prediction that the temple would be destroyed. And so Jesus answered that question in the section of our text last week, verses 5 through 23. But now, he's not just going to talk about the events at the beginning of the trailhead. He's now going to move to talk about the events at the very end of the trailhead, and it will be distinct and yet also in parallel form. So he's going to talk about not just the destruction of Jerusalem at the beginning of the end of days. He's going to talk about the return of the Son of Man that comes. And so we see that in our text. I'd invite you to look at our notes that I've handed out. I've provided an outline that I think is really critical to understanding this passage. So the structure of the passage is not just a linear structure moving all the way through. I've titled it an A-B-A-B structure, which means the first and third section are the A's, and the second and fourth section are the B's. So Jesus will begin talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, and then he'll telescope out to the end event, the coming of the Son of Man. And then he comes back and he gives a parable about the destruction of Jerusalem, and then he gives a second parable about the coming of the Son of Man. And so we'll walk through that text today, and I pray that in seeing this, we are going to see the glory that Christ has for us, because he has told us the future, and it will happen. His words will not pass away. And so it's good for you and I today to think about the ways in which we are in the last days, to think about the ways in which the last days have begun, the beginning of the trailhead of the last days, and to think of the ways in which these will match and parallel Jesus' final return. My hope and prayer is that you will grow today in loving the appearing of Jesus as a result of studying how Jesus talked about his second coming. So here's our big idea this morning. Big idea of our text, it was the same as last week, is that Jesus predicts the imminent destruction of the temple in Jerusalem while also teaching his disciples about the future second coming of Christ. So he does both here in that passage. Let's look now in verse 24 through 27, where we see after the time of destruction in Jerusalem, Jesus foretells about a future time in which the Son of Man will return riding on the clouds. Read with me in verse 24. But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not shed its light. The stars will be falling from the sky, and the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. And he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds and from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heaven. Verse 24 begins with a distinguishing transition from the previous section. The previous section, verses 5 through 23, we noted last week, had an inclusio, had a beginning and an end to it, a watch out for false messiahs, and it ended with a false messiahs watch out. Now this verse 24, begins with the word but. In the Greek here, Allah, it's a strong adversative. It's changing a section. After those tribulations of verses 5 through 23, something else will happen. And so he's moving us to consider. The first will be the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, but now there will be something else that will happen. Now, this something else, it's like hiking on the Appalachian Trail, and after hiking Springer Mountain in Georgia, someone saying, after you hike Springer Mountain, you will hike Katahdin. Now, there's a whole lot of stuff that will happen between the beginning and the end, but after those days, after that tribulation, now Jesus moves us to consider something that will happen much further in the distance, in the future, the return of Christ. Maybe a second hiking analogy. It would be like looking out at a mountain range from a distance. And you just see this mountain range, and it basically looks all as one. You can't distinguish any of the mountain peaks. You just see a range happening. And then you get closer to it, and as you get closer to it, you note that there was a peak that was miles away from the other peak. And so what we have here in the text is that a description of this. George Ladd calls this prophetic perspective. So what we have is Jesus talking about two events that seem like the same event, one mountain range, but then when you get closer to it, they're spread apart. And so he speaks about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and now he's going to move all the way to the end of the trailhead. And he's going to talk about what happens when the Son of Man returns. And the Son of Man returning here, describing this event, he says, Jesus predicts a physical darkening of the sun and the moon, a falling of stars and a shaking of the heavens. He uses apocalyptic language here. It's similar to language we find in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah 13:10 says, "The rising sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light." Isaiah 34:3 says, "When all the starry host will fall like shriveled figs from the fig tree." Noteworthy, Jesus is going to give us a parable about the fig tree. I think he's drawing from the book of Isaiah here, this imagery. These images are not merely signs of impending coming. These are signs of God coming. These are signs, descriptions of a theophany. When God appears, the heavens and creation are discombobulated. When God appears, like lightning flashing in the sky, creation responds. And so in verse 26, it says, "They will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory." And so, after the tribulation of the Jerusalem destruction, he predicts that one day in the distant future, mankind will look up into the clouds of the sky and they will see the Son of Man coming with great power and glory. Now that reference of the Son of Man riding on the clouds with power and glory is a reference drawn from Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and 14. In fact, we read that today as our call to worship. If you remember, tracking back in the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 7 begins with 4 beastly kings rising out of the muck, representing the beastly kings of the earth. And then one, like a Son of Man, comes and he conquers the last beastly king. And he draws up into heaven. He's riding on the clouds of heaven, and he comes to the Ancient of Days, God the Father. And the Father gives to this one like the Son of Man the keys of the kingdom. He gives to him the everlasting kingdom. The dominion will have no end. Indeed, what's going on here is Daniel is envisioning actually the great story of the world. The story of the world began when God created Adam and Eve, a human being. And in the garden, God gave to Adam the role of being his vice regent. He gave Adam the role to rule over God's creation. He made him a king in the garden. But do you know what Adam did with that kingship? He rebelled against God. He turned away and he forfeited his right. He, in fact, let a snake in the garden cause them to turn away against the God who created them. The history of the world after that time was a whole lot of snakes trying to reign on God's kingdom. Kingdom after kingdom after kingdom were beastly kings just ravaging the world. And then there is this promise. In the garden, God made a promise that one day one born of the seed of the woman, one like a Son of Man would come, and he would cut off the head of the snake. He would end the beastly king's reign in the world. And so what we find in Daniel 7 is one like the Son of Man has come. One who is born of humanity has come, and he has ascended into heaven, and he takes his throne, the throne that Adam abdicated, Jesus Christ took. And now in this passage, we hear this one like the Son of Man who ascended into heaven on the clouds will come in the very same fashion as he ascended. He will descend to the earth, riding on the clouds with power and glory. And when he descends, all will see him. All will see and behold this one coming on the clouds like a Son of Man. Now, when he descends, we've already picked up in the Gospels some of the events that will surround the Son of Man that comes. In Mark chapter 8, verse 38, we heard this. We heard that this event will bring shame and judgment on those who do not follow Jesus. Verse 38 of Mark 8 reads, "For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father and with the holy angels." And so at this moment that the Son of Man comes riding on the clouds, we hear that there will be people who will be ashamed at this moment because they have not followed the Lord. The very next verse, Mark 9, verse 1, predicted, "Then he said to them, 'Truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God come in power.'" That was literally fulfilled in the very next story in the book of Mark when Peter, James, and John beheld at the transfiguration the glory of Jesus Christ. It was the glory of his returning majesty. It was drawn into the present for them as Jesus was changed right before them. And so they beheld this glory. Then in Matthew 13, verses 19 through 41, it describes the coming of the Son of Man at the end. It says, "The harvest is at the end of the age. The harvesters are the angels. Therefore, just as the weeds are gathered and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will gather from his kingdom all who cause sin and those guilty of lawlessness." So there's a prediction. The Son of Man comes, he's going to send out his angels, and this time he's going to gather all those who sin. And he in the fire. Similarly, 25, verse 31 through 34 describes this very moment of the Son of Man. The Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him. Then he will sit on his glorious throne. Nations will be gathered before him and separate them one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." So describing this moment, there is a gathering both of the sheep and a gathering of the goats. And there's a gathering, and then there's a judgment that will happen, a welcoming of his sheep into the kingdom and a rejection of those who are the goats. Well, here in this verse, when the Son of Man comes, in verse 27, Mark specifically emphasizes he will send out his angels and gather his elect from the four winds. From the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven, they will be sent out. So while the two previous verses in Matthew emphasize the gathering of the lawless and at this time, Jesus here specifically focuses on the gathering of his people to himself. From the ends of the earth, there will be people who are Jesus's. The ends of the earth. This was promised in Jerusalem to Israel, to Jewish people. And he tells them that on that day when the Son of Man comes, there will be people all across the ends of the earth who are mine. Now, what has to happen in order for the ends of the earth to become disciples of Jesus? It implies here the nations are going to hear the glory of the gospel. The gospel is going to break forth from Jerusalem, and it's going to spread to the ends of the earth. Indeed, Jesus told his disciples right before he ascended riding on the clouds to heaven in Acts 1:8, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth." And brothers and sisters, you need to know this. Miamisburg, Ohio is the ends of the earth from where Jesus is talking about. We are the fulfillment of the gospel spreading across the Atlantic Ocean. We were a blip in the mind of the people in Israel at this day. They probably didn't even know we existed. We are the islands for the furthest stretches here. And yet, we today, in hearing this gospel, are a part of the fulfillment of the promise that the good news of Jesus will go from end to end, all around the world. Jesus here describes this moment as a glorious moment of gathering God's elect. John will confirm, he'll use very similar language in Revelation 14, verses 14 through 20, to describe this very event. He says, with the same exact language, "Then I looked, and there was a white cloud, and one like the Son of Man was seated on the cloud, and with a golden crown on his head, and with a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, crying out with a loud voice to the one who was seated on the cloud, 'Use your sickle and reap, for the time has come to reap, since the harvest of the earth is ripe.' And so the one seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. As he brought his people before them, verse 17 describes, so there's a harvesting of his elect, the harvesting of his people, but then there's a second harvesting here. Verse 17 says, "Then another angel, who also had a sharp sickle, came out of the temple in heaven. Yet another angel, who had authority over fire, came from the altar. And he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, 'Use the sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the vineyard of the earth, because its grapes have ripened.' And so the angel swung its sickle at the earth, and he gathered the vineyard of the earth, and he threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath." So here is my question for you today. On that day when the Son of Man comes riding on the clouds, and he sends out his angels will gather two different types of people. One will be his elect. One will be his people. One will be those who have bowed the knee to King Jesus. One will be those who are not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God to save, both for the Jew and for the Gentile. One is one who is his sheep, who has heard his voice and followed after him. If you are one of those, he will gather you together to himself, and you will be a part of his glorious kingdom. But there's a second group that will be gathered on that day. When the Son of Man comes riding on the clouds with great glory and great power, he will also send his angels out, and they will harvest the grapes of the earth. They will harvest the goats. They will harvest those who are ashamed of Jesus in this life. And they will be thrown into the winepress of God's great wrath. This morning, my word to you is to flee into the arms of your Savior. Look to Christ, the one coming on the clouds, and today follow him. Today, unite your life today. Today, say, "I want to be a sheep. You are my shepherd." Today, say, "I want you to be on the throne, not only of the world, but on the throne of my heart. I want to follow you." That is how you can know that you are one of the elect. One of the elect are those who have trusted in Christ, placed their whole faith in him, and said, "I'm following you all the days of my life." But for those that are ashamed of Jesus, those who have not raised their flag in this life and say, "I am a disciple of his," this moment of Jesus' return is a moment of great concern. It's a moment that should scare the hell out of you. And I mean that very literally. So Jesus does something in the text. He starts by talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in verses 5 through 23, and it's an awful event. It is one of the worst events in the history of the world, one of the most glorious sights in the ancient known world was absolutely burned to a crisp. Every single stone of that glorious temple was overturned and removed from its foundation. And Jesus means for the people to look at that event and then parallel that event. Parallel that event with the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven. If you think that event revealed bad wrath, you cannot fathom what will happen when God sends out his angels to gather the grapes and throws them into his great winepress. Listen, we need, just as the disciples saw the signs of the destruction of Jerusalem and they were called to flee the city, so we too are to hear about the Son of Man coming, and we are to flee to Christ today. And we are to flee to him. He alone is our hope. He alone is the one who can protect us. He alone is the one who can stand in the gap. Why? Because he alone is the one who has already been thrown into the winepress of God's wrath on our behalf. He has already suffered. All of God's wrath has been poured out on him. And so you who have united to him can say, Jesus died for me. He took the wrath of God against my sin for me, and so I can be saved. I can be a sheep. I can be a part of his kingdom. Well, next in our text, we're going to see two parables. He's going to back up and show us two parables. And the first parable is going to be a parable that helps unfold the destruction of Jerusalem. And the second parable will be able to help unfold the coming of the Son of Man, that second coming. And so look with me in our text, verses 28 through 31, where we see Jesus tells the first parable about the leaves of the fig tree to communicate to the disciples their need to watch the observable signs concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. Read with me, starting in verse 28. Learn this lesson of the fig tree. As soon as its branch becomes tender leaves, you know that the summer is near. In the same way, when you see these signs that he is near, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not until all here gives two parables with slightly compare his people. In this text, the disciples asked Jesus specifically, when will these things occur, and what is the sign that it will happen? What is the sign that it will accomplish? And they were asking this because Jesus in verse 2 of chapter 13 said, do you see these mighty stones? All of them are going to get overturned. So that's what Jesus is talking about, and the disciples ask, when will these things happen? And now Jesus gives a parable about these things happening. And he describes in this parable a near time of when all of those stones will be. People of God must be marked by a watchfulness. A watchfulness. Returning specifically to that prediction of the near events at the beginning of the trailhead of the end times, Jesus uses the fig tree as an example for watchfulness of his disciples. That they must watch both the non-signs that will happen over and over and over from 33 AD to 70 AD. Remember those non-signs? You'll hear of wars and rumors of wars. You'll hear about earthquakes. You'll hear about famines. You'll have persecutions. You'll have betrayals. And all of those things, you aren't to have a red flashing light go off. All of those things, you should proceed cautiously. You should continue on. You should be patient, and you should not fear any of those things. When you hear about wars, don't fear. The end hasn't come yet. But then Jesus gave them the sign of the abomination of desolation in the temple. When you see that, you need to run. Well, here in the parable of the fig tree, Jesus describes the deciduous tree. A tree with deciduous leaves, or a tree that has leaves that fall off in the fall and they sprout anew in the spring. And so he says, consider this deciduous tree, the fig tree. when it starts sprouting new leaves, you know that summer is coming. And so you disciples, when you hear about the non-signs and then the sign, you need to know the summer is imminent. You need to see the abomination of desolation set up in the temple, which we took last week. I took as being the profaning of the temple by the zealots when they set up in the temple their headquarters. We have a quote from the high priest of the time describing it as an absolute abomination. The high priest said, "I wish I was killed before I witnessed this occur." When they saw this, they needed to realize the destruction of Jerusalem was imminent. And they needed to flee out of the city. Indeed, Christians fled the city at this time and found themselves in a city over in the Decapolis. And they left and got out of town. The third person here, noteworthy, I just want to note, it says, in the same way, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near. Goes deep a little bit here, but the word he is near there, the word he there is just an interpretation of the Greek. It's not actually in the Greek. We're just, the writers are interpreting it. I think it's best translated, it is near, describing this event. That's probably the most accurate translation here. So he's saying when you see these things, it is near, at the door. It's coming. And then he says in verse 30, truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all of these things take place. And so Jesus was not inaccurate in that statement. He was predicting the destruction of the temple, and it happened within the generation that he was speaking to. Many of the disciples who heard Jesus say these words were alive and witnessed the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And so Jesus gave these disciples his sign, and then he gave them his word. Do you see his word there? He says, to assure them of these things, he cites that his words will never pass away. His words were identified as God's words. In Isaiah, God's words are said that even though heaven and earth will pass away, my word will not pass away. And so Jesus cites himself. And so you and I should have deep confidence as disciples of Jesus that every single word that Jesus has said comes true. And you should have even more confidence as you consider 70 AD as happening exactly as Jesus predicted it. The great temple was destroyed. But now here's the question. The question is, if we should have confidence because we have seen his words come true exactly as he said, what about the portions of the text that telescope out beyond us? What about the end of the trailhead? And so now he turns to a second parable where he picks up both now the second coming of Christ. And in this second parable, it's really critical. He slightly changes the emphasis, and the emphasis changes drastically. It's a slight change. In the first parable, we're called to watchfulness. In the second parable, we're going to be called to preparedness. Preparedness. And the reason why we have to be prepared is because the Son of Man will come at a time that we do not know. Look at the text in verse 32 through 37. Jesus tells this second parable about the master of the house returning suddenly. It communicates to the disciples the unknowability of the coming of the Son of Man and the need to be perpetually prepared. Verse 32 says, now concerning that day or hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Watch, be alert, for you don't know when the time is coming. It is like a man on a journey who left his house, gave authority to his servants, gave each one his work, and commanded the doorkeeper to be alert. Therefore, be alert, since you don't know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening or at midnight or the crowing of the rooster or early in the morning. Otherwise, when he comes suddenly, he might find you sleeping. And what I say to you, I say to everyone, be alert. And so the first parable emphasized the watchfulness of the signs and observing the seasons. Just as one would observe the fig tree and would see its leaves, you should know that the summer is imminent to come. This second parable is going to hint at a second issue. It's going to push us to be prepared at all times. And Jesus begins by saying, only the Father has set the day, the hour of the return of the Son. In his humanity here, Jesus says that even he does not know the hour of the return that is planned for the Son. Caught up in some logical speculation. Preparation for Christ's return is not about calculating the return of Christ by some calendar. That means to be prepared for the return of Jesus. Preparation for his return is not about linking together world events on some prophecy chart. Prophecy, or being prepared for Jesus' return, is about being a servant in his house, continuing to do the things that he has given you to do while he is away. And so the master of the house leaves on a journey, and he gives his servants tasks. He tells the doorkeeper, be alert, await for me at the door. And there is a real legitimate concern. This is the legitimate concern. The servants in the house grow weary, not knowing when the master is going to return. And the master doesn't come back after one day. And the master doesn't come back after 1 week. And the master doesn't come back after 1 month. And the master doesn't come back after 1 year. And the master doesn't come back after a century. And what happens in the house is the servants of the house begin to think the master's never going to come back. And so it's okay, I can go take a nap. It's okay, I can go get rest. It's okay, I can go do my own thing. I don't have to stay at my post. I don't have to keep doing the thing that he has commanded me to do. I can go do off on my own thing. And the parable, and the point of this parable is you do not know when the master of the house will return. It could happen at midnight. It could happen at the crowing of the rooster. It could happen at any point. And when he comes, you need to be prepared. Immediately after this same discourse in Matthew, the very next chapter, Matthew 25, Jesus tells another parable, a parable about 10 virgins awaiting the return of the bridegroom. And they're waiting late into the night. And those that have prepared themselves and are looking, they have their lamps ready and lit. And when the bridegroom comes, they go out to meet him. And then do you know what they do? The 5 that are ready and prepared, they meet him, and then they come with him back inside. And then the door is closed. And those that were not prepared, those that were neglectful during this time, were left out. So Jesus here has a word. Will you be ready to greet him on that day? On the day when the Son of Man comes riding on the clouds, will he find his servant, you, doing what he has called you to do? Will he find you having a rich life, a spiritual life that he has given to you? You know the will of God for your life, brothers and sisters? It's not to try to figure out some prophecy chart. The will of God for your life is biblical morality, is those who have been sanctified in Jesus, those who have fled from sexual immorality, those who have devoted themselves to prayer, those who have shared the gospel and been a light. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. God has given us a work, and we are to be those people prepared for his coming. When Jesus comes, he will recognize his own. He will recognize his sheep because his sheep are following their shepherd. And so that day, it will be a sudden day. If Jesus doesn't know the hour, brothers and sisters, you will not be able to figure out the hour either. I think actually that's probably the main point that is here in that text. So what we need to do is we need to be those people who have been watchful. We are alert. We are aware of the season. Thessalonians describes this moment as being like a thief in the night, but it will not shock Jesus' people. They will not be surprised because they have been living a life. That this day will be a day that we will not be shocked at, but we will be prepared for because we have continued to seek the Lord. So there's two big applications of this text this morning for us. The first application is for those who have not yet bowed the knee to King Jesus. They have not yet entered into being one of Jesus' sheep. And I would implore you to hear about the reality that there's coming a day in which the Son of Man will ride on the clouds. And the King of kings and the Lord of lords will come for his people. And the best way to be prepared for that day is today to bow the knee. Today to confess your sin and to repent, to seek the Lord, to be revived, to have regeneration in your life. You can be born again today by turning to the Lord. And the second thing is for all of those in this room who have said, I have had that happen to me. Today is a day that we devote ourselves anew to being prepared for Jesus' coming by living as Jesus has called us to live, by seeking his face, by seeking revival in our land and in our hearts, obeying him. If you look back at this past week and you look at your events of this last week and you just say this, you know what? I didn't really live for Jesus this past week. Oh, brothers and sisters, put your foot around for Christ. Say this week it's going to be different. I'm living for the King. I'm going to be prepared. My wick will be ready. I will have oil for the lamp so that when Jesus comes, if it's this week or if it's 100 years or if it's 1,000 years from now, it will be said of me, I was waiting at the door for him because he is near. Would you pray with me?